What is good, everyone? Hope everyone had a great Memorial Day weekend. Fun show today. I think we got a really good show. We're going to make the most of this dead time in the NFL and the dead time in this just Steelers news. You know what it is. We're at the end of May. We're coming up on June. Not much going on outside of just talk that happens from podcasts and players throwing shade at other players. We got that took place. What was it last week with Patrick Peterson seemingly taking a shot at Kenny Pickett, saying that with Russell Wilson being added to the team, that Coach Tomlin, the Steelers, actually have some credibility at the quarterback position. I get it, man. I get it. There is some cachet. There is a little bit extra that you get with your organization when you bring a Russell Wilson into town. But at the same time, I don't think Kenny Pickett was dealt the greatest of hands here in Pittsburgh with Matt Canada being his coordinator, the O-line being shaky at times, and all that came with Kenny Pickett's tenure here. We got to witness it. There was injuries that he dealt with, but ultimately it was on him to play better, and he is no longer here. But I don't know if we needed that sideshow from Pat P. I don't know if we necessarily needed that, because you're seeing some reports coming out of Eagles camp that Kenny Pickett is outplaying Jalen Hurts thus far in OTAs. I'm not that surprised. Like, I still think Kenny Pickett could be a good quarterback, but it is OTAs. It is the offseason. We got to witness what happened last year when we looked too much into the things that weren't regular season related or things that didn't count. Kenny Pickett had the best preseason, hands down, out of all the quarterbacks in the NFL last year. But we saw how things played out in the regular season and when games started to matter. And we didn't care too much about preseason when week 1 rolled around, when week 2 rolled around, week 3 rolled around. It's meaningless, absolutely meaningless. So same thing could be said with Kenny Pickett, even if he does look a little bit sharper than Jalen Hurts out there in OTAs. But that's neither here nor there. I know none of you wanted me to talk about Kenny Pickett for this show, or at least about 95% of you out there. So let's move on to what today's show is actually going to be about. And that is building this 53-man roster for the Steelers and what we need to do for the rest of this offseason to get it to where it needs to be for week 1 of 2024. And that may include some outside moves, but that also includes just some position battles that we got in-house and who's going to win out. So I'm going to go over 4 positions. I got receiver. We still got to talk about that. Wide receiver 2. What are we going to do there? Corner, specifically slot corner or cornerback 3, because there's a few different combinations that we could utilize at the quarterback position. And then we got our offensive tackle situation with Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, and then QB1, the starting quarterback. Like, that is something that's been talked about a fair amount, but also, like, in a way, being overlooked a little bit because it is an open competition. But that's the crazy part, is like you got people from one part of it, like you got the extremes of both sides, essentially. One part of the spectrum here is you got Russell Wilson is going to be around here long term. Him and the Steelers view this as like a long-term marriage. They eventually want to get a long-term deal done. And then the other side of it's like, yeah, Russell Wilson might get cut by training camp, middle of training camp, or at some point in this offseason because Justin Fields is going to outplay him. Like, am I wrong? Like, those are the extremes of what's being thrown out there over the last month or so with the Steelers starting quarterback situation. It's either Russell Wilson's going to be around here long term. He's going to capture what he was in the past and become a Pro Bowler again, an all-pro type of dude, get back to his Hall of Fame self that he was in Seattle. And, we're going to see him here for the next 4 or 5 years. He's going to play into his 40s. Or Russ is, going to get benched in week 2, or he's not even going to make it through the offseason. Steelers are going to cut him. And Justin Fields is the long-term answer. Like, there is not much in between right now. Not much. So we're going to talk about the quarterback situation to finish out the show. So let's start with, you know what, checking in with the chat. I was going to get into wide receiver 2 talk, but let's check in with the chat. Who's all in the house right here? Sniper71 says, meanwhile, when Pat P is running his mouth, he is still a free agent because he's not getting picked up yet. SMH. Now Sniper's throwing a shot at Pat P. Sniper must be a Kenny Pickett fan because I don't know if he's necessarily coming to the defense of Kenny Pickett with that comment or he's just taking a shot at Pat P. But yeah, with Pat P and let's just say when he's talking, it doesn't usually bode well for the Steelers, or at least that's what happened in his solo season here in Pittsburgh last year. He would talk a little bit on the podcast about things he was going to do in the upcoming game or just little things that he was seeing. And typically it would come off as him overlooking his opponent, and then things wouldn't work out too well for Pat P in said game versus said opponent. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, and right now he's a free agent. You're right. Like, he's getting up there in age. I don't think the Steelers got what they were looking for out of Pat P last year. Like, it wasn't terrible. It wasn't as terrible as people make it seem, but it wasn't as good as we were hoping for because his last season in Minnesota, the year before we picked him up, he had 5 picks. I think he was a lot more impactful than what we got here in Pittsburgh. Now, he did have to switch positions a little bit. He went to safety. There were some injuries in the secondary. So maybe that played into it. But, like, honestly, he started playing his best when he did move to safety, when he did become a more versatile piece as opposed to just playing on the outside. So, yeah, not the best of seasons last year for Pat P here in Pittsburgh. And, yeah, it is what it is. He's out there a free agent right now. But the thing is, he is a Hall of Famer. Like, he does know football. And I don't think his comments were necessarily wrong when he talked about Russell Wilson and there's a newfound credibility that he brings. Who can argue that? It is Russell Wilson. It's just that Russell Wilson's play has to back up some of that credibility. And in Denver over the last couple of years, one can argue that it hasn't. Specifically his first year in Denver. We could definitely say that. Russell Wilson wasn't looking right. Now, part of that could have been with injuries. But last year, like, the dude had 29 total touchdowns in 15 games and was being sabotaged by Sean Payton and the organization along the way. 29 total touchdowns, beat a Chiefs team with Patrick Mahomes, went on like that 5 or 6 game winning streak in the middle of the season. Like, if we're saying like Russ is washed and stuff from that, then all right, I guess I'll take washed Russ for the Steelers in 2024. I'll take 29 total touchdowns in 15 games. I'll take that because I actually feel like that's not bad. That's like a solid quarterback in the league in today's game. 29 touchdowns. That definitely finished top 4, no? In total touchdowns. He had 26 passing touchdowns. That was probably top 10. I don't have the stats off the top of my head and what the top 10 passers in the league did last year, but that sounds about top 10-ish because quarterback numbers were down last year. Like, Tua led the league in passing. That's all you need to know. So 26 passing touchdowns. Yeah, that was probably top 10. So if we're saying that's washed and Russ lost his credibility with the Broncos last year, then I don't know what to tell you. I think that's just off base. I still think Russ does have credibility based off of last year. Like, it's not that all of his credibility is from those Seattle days. 26 touchdowns with Sean Payton and the Broncos organization sabotaging you and playing with a not so good roster. Yeah, you probably still have some credibility added to what your resume was already before that, in the 9-10 plus seasons that you spent in Seattle and being a Hall of Famer. So going back to Pat P's comments, yeah, he's not wrong. He's definitely not wrong. Russell Wilson, even right now versus Kenny Pickett, Russ has more credibility. There's no doubt about it. But my whole stance is Kenny Pickett's still young in his career. He's only 2 years in, had to deal with a lot of stuff here in Pittsburgh in those first 2 years, but still found ways to win. And, I still think he could be a good quarterback. That's pretty much all I'm saying. You give him a capable offensive coordinator, you get some good pieces around him. yeah, I think he can win, and I think he'd be a good quarterback. So I wouldn't be surprised if somehow he found his way to be the starter over there in Philadelphia, like Jalen Hurts gets hurt or something. I wouldn't be surprised if he does well. Now, if he doesn't do well when given the opportunity this year or next year, whenever it is, and his NFL career ends up just being pretty much, he's a QB2 or like a career backup, then I'll admit I was wrong. I would definitely admit I was wrong on Kenny Pickett. Didn't know I was going to spend this much time talking about Pat P and the Kenny Pickett comments, but I had to lead off with something. I actually didn't have that planned at all. I'm not even joking with you guys. Did not plan on talking about the Pat P stuff, but yeah, it's been circling the conversations, the news media recently, because we are in the end of May. We're coming on June, and there's not much else to talk about. So there's that, and then the stuff that we're talking about today, the depth chart and the roster construction for the Steelers in 2024. How we can make this the most optimal roster that Omar Khan could put together. Sniper 71 in the house today, dropping some good comments, dropping some good content. Says they might be waiting for after June 1st to bring in Michael Thomas since they've been keeping in touch with him. Yeah, I think we got to see what happens with DK Metcalf. That's why that June 1st date is pretty important, because Seattle would be more likely to trade DK after June 1st due to just contract stuff and how they would benefit more by getting rid of DK at that point and how they would clear up more cap space. So, yeah, we're a few days away from that. And obviously DK would be, in my opinion, the best option for the Steelers. If just in a vacuum, you could talk about the best receivers or best receiver that we could get, it's DK Metcalf for many reasons. We talked about that before, though. Benny Hazen says, bring back Hines Ward. For what? As a coach? He says yes, as a receiver coach. Okay, clarifies. Jay Stokes 73 likes Calvin Austin. Says we'll be on point at wide receiver 3. He's got potential. Sniper 71 has a rebuttal. Says Calvin Austin's size is a concern to him. All right, let's get into what this show is supposed to be about, and that is, again, the 2023 or 2024 Steelers roster and how we should construct it. What are the fine details we need to put on this roster for the rest of this offseason, and just, how this depth chart is going to look come week 1. So first, we got wide receiver 2. George Pickens is obviously our wide receiver 1. He's our franchise receiver. And after that, we got a bunch of uncertainty. Now, we drafted Roman Wilson in the 3rd round of the 2024 draft. Like, he's making the roster, no doubt about it. And based off these early reports from OTAs, like, he's going to have a role. But the thing is, that's going to be in the slot. We're still looking for an outside guy. We're still looking for a wide receiver 2 to line up on the outside in combination with George Pickens. Roman Wilson, we know he could cook in the slot. But as I think it was Sniper 71 mentioned, his size isn't really built to be an outside receiver. Now, there are some small guys. We got to witness one, AB, Steve Smith. There are some outliers out there where you have small guys that can play the outside and dominate. But typically, you got a smaller frame. It's easier for you to work on the inside. So outside of Pickens and Roman Wilson, we got Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Marquez Callaway, Denzel Mims, and even Calvin Austin. But Calvin Austin, he's got a smaller frame. He's even shorter than Roman Wilson. He's like 5'7" 3/4", but he's blazing fast. I don't think that really bodes well for him on the outside, though, necessarily. He could take the top off the defense, but still work on the inside. Like, that's more likely for Calvin Austin, but we also have a Roman Wilson. So Calvin Austin's been put in a weird spot with some of these wide receiver acquisitions this offseason. Definitely in a weird spot. But we have a bunch of dudes that I don't know if we're going to be able to count on like that. Here's one of my things, though, that I keep saying. It is the NFL. And not every team is going to have every position buttoned up all the way that you want in the offseason. There's always going to be some uncertainty. There's always going to be guys where you're looking at and just like, okay, he's going to have to live up to his potential here. to get this position solidified. It's just it always happens. There's turnover in this league. There's guys leaving teams in free agency. There's dudes that retire. There's dudes that get cut. And yes, there's just matter of fact thing about this league is there's going to be some uncertainty at different positions. And right now we're sitting here at wide receiver 2. So is it the end of the world if we go into this season with Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Marquez Callaway, or Denzel Mims potentially being our wide receiver 2? No, because we have a George Pickens. We also have a Roman Wilson who will be working on the inside, a Pat Freiermuth at tight end. We have a really good stable at the running back position, upgraded the O-line. We have a Russ, and at quarterback, Russ or Justin Fields, whoever it is, like, we still have enough to make it work. It's just you got to step up. Like, that's the name of the game in the NFL. Like, you got to make your name somehow. Not everyone coming into the league was a known commodity. And some of these dudes, like a Van Jefferson, a Quez Watkins, like, they've had some shining moments here or there. They've had, these one-off seasons where they got 700 or 800 yards, but the consistency has been lacking in both of their games, at least over the course of their careers. So we're looking for a guy that could be an upgrade to these players. So we could look at 3 different spots. 1, free agency. Actually, 1 and 2 is free agency, but specifically the second category here. 1's free agency, 2 is still free agency, but we're gonna put the parentheses around it. It's like a reunion. We could bring some guys back that are familiar with the Steelers, and then the last one would be trade. So the first free agency in terms of free agency and the options that are out there right now, it's a little bleak. We know that because, just 2-3 weeks ago, a lot of names went off the board that I think could have fit the wide receiver 2 spot for the Steelers pretty well. Like a DJ Chark, Odell ends up signing in Miami, Tyler Boyd, even though I still don't think that would have worked out here completely. He ends up going to the Titans. And then before that, Mike Williams, he signs with the Jets. Steelers were interested in him. Basically, yeah, a lot of the targets that we were talking about through a good portion of this free agency period are gone. And we're left with Michael Thomas, McCole Hardman, and Sterling Shepard. I'd say those are the top 3 dudes that are available now in free agency. With McCole Hardman and Sterling Shepard, I think they would basically be the exact same type of receiver that we already have in-house with a Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Denzel Mims, Cal. It's dudes that have shown flashes, but I don't think you can count on or rely on that much. Michael Thomas, different story. All-pro receiver. Actually won Offensive Player of the Year. That seems like forever ago at this point. I think that was back in 2019, 2018, 2019. Offensive Player of the Year. Started off his career with the Saints blazing hot. What was it, 4 or 5 seasons in a row, over 1,000 yards. He was argued to be the best receiver in the league at one point. Argued to be. I mean, I think us as Steeler fans, we're still going to have AB in that number 1 spot. But he was there. He was in that top 2 or 3 range based off his consistency and the raw numbers that he was putting up and just the overall production he had with Drew Brees down there in New Orleans. But then he gets his contract, deals with injuries. Doesn't seem like he was ever too eager to come back from these injuries. Dare I say, would maybe be milking these injuries out at times. And then, over the last 4 or 5 seasons, it's just been lackluster. It's either been injuries or when he's been out there, he hasn't been the same. But, if you look at last season, it wasn't terrible. He still was a target for Derek Carr, still put up some decent numbers whenever he was out there. Was it otherworldly? Was it, top class? No, it wasn't. But as a wide receiver 2, could Michael Thomas still get it done? Yeah, maybe. Because, that's kind of what he was with the Saints last year. But again, he dealt with injuries. If he would have played the full season, he would have had around 700 or 800 yards. So, I'm intrigued in Michael Thomas. If we're going to talk about free agency and, those 3 names, McCole Hardman, Sterling Shepard, no thanks. We already have those type of dudes in-house right now. But a Michael Thomas, because he has that name, because he has that cachet, sure, if the number's cheap, and he has that chip on his shoulder, he's got that motivation to get things right. What's it hurt? I like it as a high risk, I'm not a high risk. It shouldn't be a high risk. No, if the contract number is low, I'm sorry. As a low risk, high reward type of situation. Because you sign him on something cheap, 1 year, 4 or 5 million, something like that, 1 year, 3 million, prove it type of deal. It's low risk. If it doesn't work out, you cut him. We've seen that happen with a multitude of dudes here in Pittsburgh. The one that comes to mind most recently was Melvin Ingram. Low risk. You brought him in for a cheap deal. He wanted out. You got rid of him. You got a 6th-round pick in return. So same thing with Michael Thomas. Mike Tomlin's mantra is we want volunteers, not hostages. If things don't work out with Michael Thomas, his attitude's bad, whatever it is, yeah, we'll just cut ties. It ain't gonna be the end of the world. But if he could turn back the clock a little bit, find some type of connection with Russell Wilson, you got both of those dudes that have a lot at stake this upcoming season, like in terms of like their careers and how they're going to be viewed going forward, and like a Russell Wilson and a Michael Thomas, veterans that made it to that high level in the past, but like there's question marks around them now. Like they got to prove a lot. You combine a Russell Wilson with a Michael Thomas, and like those two dudes can get on the same page and play with that chip on their shoulder, find that connection. Could be something dangerous here. No pun intended. So I like Michael Thomas. If we're going to do free agent, that I think we should go with him. But that reunion category, like I guess that subcategory of the free agency main category, we could bring in a Martavis Bryant, spend the block on him. AB, I can't even take that serious. No, never mind. No, we're not bringing back AB. He did file for bankruptcy. Maybe he could, use a NFL contract, even if it is not the contract that he's used to when he was playing here. But yeah, I could see him wanting to get back in the league, but I can't see the Steelers or any other team taking that, signing AB as a serious consideration. No, I wanted to say it as a joke. It's just not happening. But you know what? Juju Smith-Schuster, though, what about that? And he wouldn't be under the free agent category, actually. He would be trade, but he could be a free agent pretty shortly, because there's reports out there saying that New England and Juju not on the same page. New England views him as expendable. They're not really thrilled about Juju anymore. So it's either the Steelers could trade for him, or, if New England cuts him, Steelers could pick him up in free agency. I don't like this one. So with Martavis, even too, no. He didn't even play good in the XFL, man. He was supposed to be the best receiver in the XFL, and wasn't even the best receiver on his team. He was like the 4th or 5th best receiver on his team. He had a bunch of no-name dudes outshine him. So I just think he's done. Didn't really find anything in Dallas last year. He was signed to their practice squad, wasn't able to make it to their roster on any of the game days. And then, yeah, with Juju, obviously AB, no. Juju, I just don't see it, man. I don't see it. We're looking for a wide receiver too, do it on the outside. I think Juju could fit in the slot, but we got Roman Wilson. I'm just over that era of Steeler football, that the whole TikTok era with him and Claypool and all that nonsense. So my answer on that one is no. So far of the 6 names that I mentioned, Michael Thomas, McCole Hardman, Sterling Shepard, Juju Smith-Schuster, Martavis Bryant, and AB, the only one I would really want is Michael Thomas. Now, those are low-cost options, ones that, you could either sign a dude easily, or it'd be some type of cheap trade to get a Juju in here. Out of those options, it's Michael Thomas. Like, those are the low-cost options. We do have some potential high-cost options, though, and we've been over these, and this would include trading for DK Metcalf, for Brandon Ayuk, for Courtland Sutton. The one that I think is most likely and makes the most sense would be Courtland Sutton. Obviously has the Russ connection, had 10 touchdowns in Denver last year, was a good red zone target for Russ, and wouldn't cost as much as an Ayuk or a DK Metcalf. Probably would only take like a 5th or 6th round pick to get him in here. And the contract that he has right now isn't as much as what DK's is, and isn't as much as what Brandon Ayuk is looking for. So I think it's the most like cost-effective, efficient approach if you want to go trade. But I think DK Metcalf would be just flat out right the best option, point blank, period. Yeah, if we got to eat his $25, $26 million cap hit for this year, fine. And if we got to take that on for next year, fine. But then his contract's up. And then we could look at how things worked out here in Pittsburgh with the DK, how things worked out with Pickens, and figure out how to pay these dudes after the fact. So it's like we're not locked in with DK for 4 or 5 years to some crazy contract, but like we'd have him for, I think, fair market value for these 2 seasons, and then you could make decisions on what to do with the receiver room and how you allocate those contracts in 2026. So I would do DK. I think a lot of you guys would agree with me. I think he'd be the best option via trade. But Courtland Sutton makes a ton of sense to me too. I wouldn't be against that at all. And then with just free agent options that are out there, low cost options, Michael Thomas. That's what I'm looking at. I would go DK, Courtland Sutton trade, and then Michael Thomas. I think that's how I would do it in that order if I was the Steelers. Obviously, getting Brandon Ayuk is cool, but the numbers I'm hearing are astronomical. It's like 35 million. I don't want to do that. Don't want to do that at all. And obviously, with DK Metcalf, we would have to give up something more significant than a late round pick that it would take to get Courtland Sutton. But I think it would be worth it in DK's case. Now let's get to cornerback. What do we do at corner? Right now it's almost exactly like the receiver position. It's just that it's flipped for defense. We got our top 2 guys. We got a JPJ, we got a Dante Jackson. Just like in the receiver room, we know 2 guys, even though I don't know if we're considering Roman Wilson like our number 2, but we know he's like the second option right now. Like he's got his spot solidified. We got Pickens and Roman Wilson. In the quarterback room, we got JPJ and Dante Jackson. We got our 2 guys there. And then a bunch of uncertainties for various reasons. Corey Trice, he was a 7th round pick last year. We had high hopes for him in the offseason. Looks like he was going to be a really good running mate with JPJ, but gets hurt. Tears an ACL, out for the season. So he's coming back from that. He hasn't gotten any significant playing time in the NFL just yet. So it's wait and see mode for him. But if it works out, high potential, high upside, could be really dominant. Potential to be really dominant. Him and JPJ, 2 avatars out there at the cornerback position, would be awesome. You got Darius Rush, who was being mocked to go in the 3rd round in last year's draft, ended up slipping to the 5th, but then has just a weird run in his first NFL season where he is on 3 different teams, 3 different practice squads, ends up getting some time here in Pittsburgh, like actually playing, but not much time to where we should be hanging our hat on him doing anything significant in year 2. But upside type of dude. If he could show up in the offseason and do well in these OTAs, show out in training camp and preseason, then it's like, who knows? Like, why not? Like, he was considered a 3rd round type of dude in last year's draft. Like, he's got as much talent or upside as anyone out there. So who knows? We got an Anthony Everett that we picked up off free agency. Spent last year not on a team at all, but we're familiar with him because he played with the Ravens. Also spent a season with the Raiders. I can't remember if it was more than 1 season, but had a short stint with the Vegas Raiders too. Yeah, he's just like a veteran dude. He's been in the league for a minute, 5-6 years. But whenever the Steelers would play the Ravens, there was a reason why I would feel good about our passing game when Everett was out there. You also got Luke Barku. He was a pickup for us out of the XFL last offseason, but was able to stick around a little bit. Just Size Scott. Pull out the Snoop meme for this one. I don't know who this guy is, but then we also drafted Ryan Watts in the 6th round of the 2024 draft. But we're thinking about moving him to safety. So outside of JPJ and Dante Jackson, lot of uncertainty, lot of who knows type of stuff with this cornerback room. So the options we could do here. Free agency, just like receivers. We could pick up a couple guys in free agency. And the subcategory of that free agency category, we could do reunion free agent pickups as well. And then also trade. So with free agency, you got Xavier Howard, Stephon Gilmore, Adoree Jackson, also in free agency, but specifically bringing back dudes that played for the Steelers in the past. Do you spin the block on Cam Sutton? Pat P, we were talking about early in the show. He's still out there. A Steven Nelson, a Keller Witherspoon, Chandon Sullivan, Elijah Riley. And then trade. I don't know who's available out there. I did some research on it who could be available. Like, I looked at different cornerback rooms across the league, and like with the Eagles, it's kind of busy there. They just picked up Quinyon Mitchell, and they have Darius Slay, James Bradbury in there. So maybe one of those guys are expendable, whether it's Bradbury or Darius Slay to Philly. And then Dax Hill with Cincy, they got their two top outside guys and DJ Turner and Cam Taylor-Britt, but then they have Mike Hilton in the slot. So what role is Dax Hill playing? He's a former first-round pick for them, but I don't know how willing they're going to be to make a move or make a trade with an AFC North rival. We've talked about that before. AFC North or just interdivision trades and stuff typically don't happen too often, and rightfully so. But speaking of the AFC North, I was also thinking Greg Newsome, because I just saw articles that the Browns may be willing to move off him, and I don't think he's that bad of a corner. I think out of these options, the trade category is least likely. Let's just throw that out there. Let's just not even consider that as a possibility. So I think free agency, an Xavier Howard or Stephon Gilmore or Dory Jackson, I could see that. But my question is, like, what are we doing? Like, what's our configuration here with these corners and who's specifically going to be playing the slot? Like, do we want a slot corner, or do we want to take an outside guy on occasion and move him to the inside? Because if you want to do the latter, I think the free agent option of signing Xavier Howard or Stephon Gilmore isn't a bad approach at all. But I could also see them wanting to just wait on Corey Trice, because you can do that move an outside cornerback thing into the inside with Corey Trice. And obviously he's the younger option. He's the guy that you probably have more hopes in of being a long-term answer versus an Xavier Howard or Stephon Gilmore. So maybe the Steelers will just be waiting out this offseason, seeing what these dudes do in OTAs and also in training camp. Because if Trice works out, then yeah, I don't think you need to sign one of these veteran dudes. I think if anything, it would just be stunting a dude like Trice's growth, or even Darius Rush's growth. Now, a potential reunion with Cam Sutton, you still got to see what happens with his legal situation, but it does look like he was facing a misdemeanor, but had to do some stuff behind the scenes. It looks like it's going to be dropped completely. The charges and the case is going to be dropped completely. I don't think we've had an update on that right now, but that's what it was looking like a couple of weeks ago. And obviously, Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin met with Cam Sutton. I think it was around draft time, checking in. So who knows? Like, that one, just from a straight on the field standpoint, again, we got to just see what happens with his legal situation. Like, that still has to be completely cleared, and the Steelers got to be okay with everything that comes out from that. But just on the field, like, that could make the most sense because of Cam Sutton's versatility and how he came up here in Pittsburgh in the slot. Bounced to outside in his last 2 years, but we're looking for a slot corner. We're looking for, obviously, guys with versatility, and Cam Sutton fits that bill. Patrick Peterson, he keeps talking about how he'd be a perfect fit to come back, how he could still be JPJ's mentor and be the slot corner for the Steelers that they're looking for. But I think his time is come and gone here in Pittsburgh. I'm thinking it's over. But if things aren't working out with some of these other corners outside of JPJ and Dante Jackson this offseason, maybe the Steelers do give him a call. Steven Nelson, that's not happening. And Keller Witherspoon, I don't think that's happening either. Although on a cheap contract, he played good last year with the Rams. I wouldn't be opposed. I don't know what the temperature is like with him and the Steelers and just what the vibes are. But then it goes back to, what are we looking for? Are we looking for an outside guy and just mixing and matching these dudes and having outside guys play in the slot on occasion, or even bumping like a DeMonte Casey down to play slot on occasion, or a Deshaun Elliott? Like, are we going that approach where it's just like you have one position played by multiple different dudes at different times throughout a game? Or do we want a slot corner? Because if we want a slot corner, then you're looking at Shannon Sullivan or Elijah Riley. And I don't think it would take that much to get them back in the building either. 1-year vet minimum type of contracts. Now, this cornerback room, it's weird. I actually feel less urgent to make an outside move as I do with the wide receiver position. I'm interested in Corey Trice and Darius Rush. I'm interested to see what they could do this offseason. Whereas with the receiver room, I feel like I would prefer getting an outside guy like a Michael Thomas or a DK Metcalf or a Cortland Sutton than waiting and seeing what Van Jefferson or Quez Watkins or Denzel Mims can do. You guys feel me on that? Like that's how I'm looking at both these situations, because we were talking a lot about Corey Trice last offseason, and even there's buzz this year about Darius Rush doing some stuff. Like, I'd be interested to see what those guys can do, because we have JPJ. Obviously, he's going to be hitting his stride coming into his second year. Had an awesome rookie season. Dante Jackson, we know he's savvy veteran, fast corner. Like, played really good in it down in Carolina while he was there. Like, we got two dudes there, and we can makeshift that slot corner where I don't think we can makeshift wide receiver 2 as much. And I like Corey Trice and Darius Rush, at least their upside, I think better than Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins and Denzel Mims, because we've seen more of those guys in the league as opposed to Trice and Rush up to this point. Trice and Rush, they just had their rookie year last year. Like, they're going into year 2. I'm more intrigued with them as opposed to, I think we have a ceiling on the receivers outside of Pickens and Roman Wilson. But that's, my thoughts on a couple of the positions that we could be looking at on the outside, and that's wide receiver 2 and cornerback 3, slot corner, however you want to spin it. But what are you guys thinking? I think I'm going to have to skip the I was going to bring up the offensive tackle situation and QB1. I did talk about QB1 a little bit at the beginning, and just how people either think it's definitely going to be Russ and, he's actually going to be a long-term answer here, or it's people thinking that Russ is going to get benched after week 2 or in the offseason, and, Justin Fields is going to be the guy this year. And he's going to end up being the long-term answer, and the Steelers know that, Fields is the future. Like, just, a lot of extreme takes, whereas I think Russ is going to play good, so it's going to be hard to keep him off the field. And it's going to be hard for Justin Fields to beat out Russell Wilson in an offseason setting, in an OTA and training camp setting, because Russell Wilson has done this type of stuff how many years thus far in the league. He knows what he's doing. I just don't think that Justin Fields is going to be able to beat him out. And then when you combine Russell Wilson with what we have on offense, I don't think he's going to play bad. I just don't. Going back to what I was talking about last year with the Broncos, 29 total touchdowns, and I don't think the Broncos team is as good as what the Steelers have this year. So that's my thought. But I don't think the Steelers are like so solid or so set in stone one way or another on Russell Wilson or Fields being the future. I think they just want to see how the season plays out. I think they're going to be taking it a week at a time, a month at a time, and they'll make the decision after the season, because, we don't do contract negotiations in the middle of the season. So, I think it's just wait and see mode for not only the quarterbacks, but a lot of the other players on this roster. And then with the offensive tackle situation, I mean, because that's the thing with the OT, the offensive tackle, and the quarterback, these are things that are uncertainties in a way that are going to be handled in-house. Like, we don't have to look outside for either of these two spots, but it's just like, what's going to happen? How's this going to affect the roster? How's this going to affect what we're doing here? I think it's got to be Troy Fautanu starting on the right tackle side and Broderick Jones starting on the left. Like, that's how I think it should be, but early reports and OTAs look like the Steelers are going to be taking it slow. And if that's the case, it's not the end of the world. It's just a bummer, because I feel like you should be taking a tackle in the first round if you think he's going to start. Like, if not, we had other positions we could have been looking at and taking like a Brian Thomas or a Quinyon Mitchell or something, because those dudes were available. If you were going to start the season with Broderick Jones and Dan Moore, potentially, why not take another guy that was going to hopefully help out your team more than a Troy Fautanu who might be sitting on the bench? You get what I'm saying? Like, that's the bummer. If the Steelers were that okay with Dan Moore and Broderick Jones, then, man, take a Brian Thomas, take a Quinyon Mitchell, because we're still talking about wide receiver 2 and an extra cornerback to bring in right now. We just have an extra offensive tackle. We just have an extra potential starting offensive tackle right now. And I guess it's nice to have that depth. It's nice to have just extra dudes on the offensive line with talent, because it is a very important position. It is a very important factor in an offense and how well they do. Like, the offensive line, when they're humming, you got the run game going, you got the pass game looking better. But man, I hope we go with Fautanu and Broderick Jones as our starting tackles to start the season. Because if not, then yeah, I'm gonna question what we did with that first pick a little bit. Now, you can't fully judge a first round pick until 4 or 5 years go by, but still, it would be a bummer, at least for 2024 and like the immediate, right? It'd be a bummer just because we're not able to see the guy that we took in the first round be out there and make impact. We almost witnessed that last year with Broderick Jones. If it wasn't for Chooks acting up, we wouldn't have seen Broderick Jones at all. I guess it is what it is. But what are you guys saying? Probably went over time here a little bit. Let me read a comment or two. Then I got to get up out of here. We got some Cam Sutton talk. Sniper71 says Cam Sutton is trash. Dude was getting torched by rookies, and a pallbearer. Dude is gonna have a legal problem to put him in suspension. Yeah, that you gotta see how that plays out. That's what I keep prefacing everything revolving around Cam Sutton when we're talking about potentially bringing him in. Like, you still got to see what happens with him from a legal standpoint. And then obviously, yeah, the NFL, they're going to have decisions there too about suspending him or not. So this is something the Steelers are going to have to look at and consider for sure. But it does look like the charges will be dropped. I think the case will be dropped, most likely. We still, again, need an update on that. But in terms of him just playing slot corner, again, I don't know, man. Like, I think that would fit him better at this point, because you're right. I don't think he had the best of seasons out there in Detroit last year, but he was paid and was playing as like their CB number 1 on the outside. If you could bring him in and have him play CB3 and get him back to his more natural spot in the slot, I think that would be more beneficial to him. Steel K says, get Gilmore and move Jackson to nickel corner. Okay. I feel you on that. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, if we're going to bring in another guy, if we're going to bring in a guy on the outside, do we just have a bunch of different dudes play the slot as opposed to having a slot corner? Because that would be the approach you could take right there. Brent Winter says, pass on Thomas. He doesn't like Michael Thomas. Okay. Fair. Is he talking about Brian Thomas or Michael Thomas? Because I was bringing up Brian Thomas a little bit there when we were talking about offensive tackle. Taylor Hoffman says, bring back Martavis Bryant. LOL. That ain't happening. And that is what I'm going to end the show on. Hope you guys enjoyed. Stay chilling. I'm going to be back at some point in June. I will let you guys know. But hope you enjoyed. And yeah, let's just see how the rest of this offseason plays out. We got about 2 months, almost 2 months till training camp. But all right, stay chilling. Peace.